If you have a policy where you fire people for an action and you keep having to fire people, your policy isn't working. The problem is when you delete someone's career, when you take it away, you take away so much information that they had that could help you figure out why that happened. Because oftentimes, if one person's doing it, so is somebody else.
How can we motivate an employee or coworker to positively change a behavior? Implementing consequences are often the lowest form of motivation. They may lead to short-lived solutions, and they are often only effective when someone is watching. So how do we create more lasting change that is effective even when Big Brother isn't watching over our shoulders? Well, there are two more powerful motivators we can try and tap into. The first is the company's values, which hopefully align with the more powerful motivator, and that is the individual's personal values. If you can find a way to connect to someone's personal values and show them the why a rule or a policy or a behavior change actually aligns with their own personal values, then you can motivate more permanent and meaningful change in someone's behavior. Chris Fingston from EMS 2020 sat down with us after his lecture at Fast 24 to talk about just that.
If your company's mission is to help people, then find that and relate to that, because chances are your employee's mission does too.
You on 8? 2 on 8. Okay, you're clear. Stand by for your base.
Welcome to EMS Cast, where we provide high-level education for you, the providers on the streets. We are on site again at Fast 24 and just listened to a phenomenal lecture by Chris Fingston. Did I get it right?
Yeah, you nailed it.
Oh, man. He is the host of EMS 2020, and you guys do a great show where you review real-life EMS calls and dissect them and go through them. And I think you and your co-host Spencer have a phenomenal vibe together. It's real fun to listen to. So if our listeners haven't heard them, they should definitely go check them out. I think it's a great show.
For sure.
Thanks, man.
Thanks for coming to talk with us after your lecture.
Yeah, you fed me beer last night. Yeah. So I'm going to pull that fourth wall back right away. This is pure bribery.
You know, you're looking sharp right now. I didn't know you hippies from Portland owned suits.
Yeah, no, just one.
Okay.
That's all we're allowed. Yeah.
It's for court, funeral, wedding.
Court, funeral, and then wedding, and then if you're leaving the state, it's fine
right.
at any time.
Yeah. You have to come to the East Coast to give a talk.
Yeah, exactly. You have to buy 2 hacky sacks to offset the suit, but once you do that, you're set. It's actually really open. You know.
Nice.
Yeah.
You just gave us a great talk on kind of just culture or just culture-esque. And what prompted you to want to give this talk?
What prompted me to kind of want to give that talk is that over the time of my EMS experience, I worked at an agency there was a pre-just culture era of that agency, and then they had a post-just culture era, after they implemented just culture. Because just culture is now something I think it's so common in our field that we kind of forget that there was a time where it wasn't in our field. And once my agency started adopting just culture, you saw a lot of real positive changes. And I'd just become a supervisor right around the time that just culture had hit a peak at that agency. And so we were really trying to grapple with it. And it was a really cool process. But one of the things I discovered over the years is that a lot of the just culture training was very, very good at telling you when you should coach versus when you should discipline, right? And that how, even when you discipline, the goal is always to build a better employee. It's never just to exert your authority, that's not the goal. But we never really got into the nitty-gritties of how to make coaching effective. And what I started to discover over time is that everyone breaks rules. Everybody breaks rules. And the example I used in today's speech was not using a backer when you're backing, which I slaughter that rule on the daily, right? Like a lot of us do. Not that you should, but a lot of us
Not
do.
endorsed.
Yeah, it's a very commonly broken rule that we find throughout many of the agencies and people from the agencies we get to talk to just by the fact of doing our podcast and from my own experience. And so because of that, I was trying to figure out, but why do people break these rules? Like why? It's actually, and here's the thing about the backer policy, it's really easy to follow, right? We just don't. And so that's why I wanted to break down what motivates people. And we kind of found there's 3 motivators. And that's what inspired me to talk about those today, is to try and get those motivators out there.
Yeah, I think before just culture became a little more prevalent, it was pretty easy. If somebody did something wrong, you just sort of came down on them and
Fired
at worst, maybe you got rid of them. And then, you're in a leadership role and people are like, hey, we're not going to do that anymore. It's going to be like a softer side, which actually sells the whole process short.
Sure.
And I think that, you captured that by getting into trying to understand what motivates people to make their decisions. So if you could tell us more about that.
So you brought up a really good point, and that is pre-just culture era of like, oh, you did something wrong, I got a solution for that. Rip your name off the schedule.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you this, you cannot fire people fast enough to gain compliance in a rule. And this is my favorite thing ever, was I was sitting down, this is in Arizona, and I was sitting down in just kind of a table with a bunch of different people. And there's a guy there, he's a little bit louder. He was actually a super fun guy, but we had one little period of disagreement. And he's sitting there, and he's like, he has a policy at his company to where if you back without a backer twice and it ends with an accident twice, you're done. That's it. You're fired. And so I'm sitting there, I'm like, okay. So I asked questions, I'm like, oh, yeah, do you guys actually follow through on that? He goes, you bet we do. I'm like, all right. So you've actually fired people? He's like, yeah. I'm like, okay. How many more do you think you have to fire before people stop doing it? And he just kind of paused, and I'm like, look, here's the thing. If you have a policy where you fire people for an action and you keep having to fire people, your policy isn't working. And the other thing about that too is I can guarantee you the only time you know about that is when you see it. It happens all the time.
Right.
And so on the show, we call them fucked up bumper rules, because you can kind of tell which EMS agencies have those rules, and you just go back and look at their bumpers and they all have dings in them. And I can guarantee you there's not a write-up for each and every ding on all 30 ambulances on the back there.
Well, it misses the true heart of just culture, which is examining the system failure and the system problem and the system solution.
Exactly.
And
do we have backup cameras?
Right.
Yeah.
And we're speaking, you used the example in your talk of backing an ambulance without a backer, because I think it's very relatable to us, but you could pick, this is applicable to any error.
Yeah.
Or any human error, any error that happens in an agency, or any policy that gets broken frequently.
Yeah, absolutely it can be. And I think it's just important to recognize that at the end of the day, you do employ humans, and humans are fallible. And the main character in my talk was a guy named Reverse Ralph, who violates the policy, right? But I also tried to give the example of speeding. In my talk, I talked about the lowest form of motivation is the consequence. Then you have the company value, and then you have a personal value. And I talk about speeding. A lot of people speed. I speed. People who say they don't speed, what that really means is, well, I don't speed more than 5 miles an hour over. That's what that really means.
Or I don't get in trouble for it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so like a personal value is something you hold true no matter what. It's determined by you and you alone. And it will cause you to follow or break rules. Okay. So if I'm in a vehicle that can handle the road I'm on, and my skills can handle the road I'm on, then that's a personal value. And if the state is putting a 40 mile an hour, speed limit on a 6-lane highway, then the only thing left for me to really consider not speeding is the consequence, right? Because I can outdrive this road. I don't understand why the state wants me to go 40 miles an hour on a 6-lane highway. So the only thing I'm worried about is if there's a cop over my shoulder. Well, guess what? There ain't no cop. I'm speeding. And so is everyone else on that road for that matter. But you narrow the road, you put some snow and you put some ice on it. Not only am I going to start understanding why the state wants people to go slow, I'm not going to go the speed limit, because my personal value of not wanting to die on the road is going to override any speed limit you put on a sign. I'll be that guy that's too slow. I don't care. And so that's why we have to understand what motivates people to follow and break rules. And so in the example with Ralph, backing policy seems really simple, but if you don't tell Ralph why you really need him to follow the rules, and in this example, it's because even though Ralph is a perfect backer, other people look up to him. I need other people to follow that rule. If you don't do that and you don't relate to Ralph, hey, look, these backing accidents, though they're minor, when they add up, they cost the company. They hinder our ability to help. And that relates to Ralph a lot better than anything else that I could possibly say to him.
Well, you hit on something that is just true of EMS, and that is the majority of EMS providers, they're doing their job unsupervised.
Yes.
It is a unique animal in that you're given a lot of autonomy, a lot of responsibility, and a lot of expensive equipment, and told, go out into the community and do the right thing.
Yeah.
And so when we, see an error or something rises to the surface, there's a lot that happen that we don't know about. So
Absolutely.
Addressing the one thing can miss the point. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Have you ever heard of the Swiss cheese model?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the Swiss cheese model is a good example of what you're talking about. There's many, many, many things that occur up until we get that outcome. You ever heard the term outcome bias?
Yes.
Yeah. So outcome bias is basically where, oh my God, something bad happened. We got to fire. We gave the wrong medication. We got to fire. But the problem is when you delete someone's career, when you take away so much information that they had that could help you figure out why that happened. Because oftentimes if one person's doing it, so is somebody else, right? And the Swiss cheese model is basically that situation where, hey, we have a lot of barriers to prevent us from getting to this point, but there's holes in each and every one of them. And if you have all your Swiss cheese, slices of Swiss cheese in a row, eventually those holes can line up and we can go right through all those barriers and hit that error. And you're right. There's so many different steps that lead to that end. So I absolutely agree with you. Yeah, it's a process.
So when you're trying to address that kind of personal value, how do you speak to that individual? How do you get to that level on the motivational ladder?
So as it turns out, companies are obsessed with personal values from the get-go, right? We do interviews. We interview people before they can get the job, and we ask the silly questions like, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Tell me about a time you had a conflict with somebody. And what we're really trying to assess is, personally, does this person align with what we want here? Are they going to align with the company values? And so what I would encourage people is think about the kind of questions and the kind of things you learned about this person at hiring, and think about what your company's mission is. You may not remember their interview, but hopefully, at one point you hired them because they understand your company's mission. And if your company's mission is to help people, then find that and relate to that, because chances are your employee's mission does too.
That also relates to a system error that also gets overlooked frequently, which is you hired this person.
Yes.
So you trained them. If they're performing in a way that is not meeting your standard, you should also be looking in the mirror to evaluate
Absolutely.
Your hiring process, your training process. Those are all things that need to be looked at closely.
And I think that has been hands down the biggest net positive change that I've seen in companies that go just culture, right? Is they take that system first look. What happened outside the employee? And that is definitely a positive change. But as you're trying to look to, if you get down to that coaching moment, as you're trying to look for different personal values, if you know someone on a personal level, because one of the hard parts about a lot of the larger private ambulance companies these days is that the number of direct reports per supervisor is really, really high. You have a substantial amount. And so it gets really hard to get to know your employees and figure out what their personal values are. But I would also exercise caution if you think you know someone's personal values that's maybe outside the company goal and you try to relate to that, because if you're wrong, that can go the complete opposite way. But no, being able to spend time and talk to your employees and figure out what their passions are can absolutely make a big difference. Let's go back to, I want to call him Wreck-It Ralph, but it's Reverse Ralph. Let's go back to Reverse Ralph again. We talked about how he's going to be influencing the future generation. Well, let's say he's a newer employee and he has aspirations to become a field training officer and that kind of stuff. That is something where you can know, okay, like generally we hire people who want to help people, but I also happen to know through talking with Ralph that he wants to eventually get into field training. And so maybe there's another personal value angle that we can talk to him about training new people and why leading by example is so important. And so you have other personal values you can link to that way.
So I think I hear you saying there's a huge emphasis on relationship with staff during
I think
this.
it's very important. I really do. Yeah. I mean, I think I'm also one of those guys that thinks, professionalism kind of, above all else, you don't need to be everybody's buddy. That's not the goal. But in terms of like sitting down and really getting to know people, having people not fear you. Someone else had talked about that earlier. I want to say it was, who was it? I think it was Jeff from Master Your Medics had talked about poor leadership is leading through fear. You can't do that. Your employees cannot fear you. In fact, when things go wrong, your employees need to be able to lean on you. And I think being there for your employees in that capacity, not leading by fear, it's going to go a long way in terms of just keeping people feel like they can report to you, and you can improve your system that way. So,
all this resonates heavily with me because I was also a frontline supervisor for many years. Yeah. In a large.
How many years management sober are you now?
2.
I'm 4.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi,
Gotcha.
my name's Will, and I'm 2 years management sober.
Absolutely. I'm going to get you a chip.
Yeah. If you lead through fear, remember 90% of an EMS provider's day is unsupervised.
Yeah.
So what are they going to do? Well, they're just going to avoid seeing their supervisor, you know?
The one of the things that when I became an FTO, being an FTO, by the way, was one of my favorite jobs that I ever did. Although it's funny,
one of the most understated opportunities to learn leadership.
100%. And I agree. And the other thing too is because you get asked questions you didn't even think of. Because trust me, your trainee's thinking of everything like, oh my God, I don't want to fail. And so I thought I was really good at the job. And then I got promoted to FTO. Then I'm like, oh, I'm terrible at this. And I remember at the 2-month mark, I'm like, I got to go talk to my boss, say I want to go back to just being a senior paramedic. And then for some odd reason, my third trainee, things just hit. And they were actually like a challenge, but they ended up coming around. And then I was like, no, I really like this. But when I was becoming an FTO, one of the more senior FTOs, you know, like the old wizard on the hill guy, he was like, hey man, like, here's the thing. Don't be like, there's a couple guys that were known to be hard nosed. He's like, don't be like them. He's like, because here's the thing, like this job's fucking terrifying, right? In a lot of ways terrifying. They're brand new. You should not be the scariest thing in this job. There are plenty of other scary things they're going to run into. You need to be the least scary thing. So I thought that was always great advice. And it still is.
Yeah, I liked telling trainees, like, hey, no matter what, we're still partners today. We're the only ones on that scene dressed like each other.
Yeah.
So when it all goes sideways, we're going to be left with nothing but each other. Yeah. So sure, I'm going to hold you accountable to stuff. I'm going to try to teach you stuff. But at the end of the day, we're partners still.
Yeah. We got to get through this. Absolutely.
And at some point, we may have to figure this out together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the cool thing about EMS is that, you know, oftentimes people are like, well, you got online medical control, but that's not really the same, you know, because and I always feel bad for doctors, you know, like you, where someone calls and says, hey, I know you're at the end of this phone line, but can you tell me what to do? And you're just like, no. You know, like, that's how I would feel.
Yeah. Thanks for the help.
Yeah. But it's hard. Yeah.
Well, thanks so much, Chris.
Hey, no problem. Thank you guys for having me.
Fans of your show. Best of luck, you and Spencer.
You know, it's mostly just me, right? Spencer's fake.
Just AI
He's just
generated.
He's just
AI generated, right?
A figment of
I
your...
suspected that. Yeah.
So anyway, hey guys, thanks for having me.
It was
Appreciate
a lot of fun.
Yeah, man.
Thanks, man.
This is just a teaser on just culture and motivational change. For a deeper dive on these topics, which I highly recommend, check out the additional resources and good reads in the show notes. Thanks again to Chris for sitting down with us. If you guys haven't heard of EMS 2020, definitely go check them out. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another educational episode. Until then, you can follow us on Instagram at EMScast or go check out our associated web content at emspodcast.com. And please leave us a review in Apple or a comment in Spotify. We'd love to hear what you guys think about the show. All right, everyone, be safe out there, and remember, what you do matters.